Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the latest on how Brexit shortages are coming at a serious cost to us, this time in the form of a massively increased amount of partially untreated sewage being dumped into our rivers because we can't get enough chemicals. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So as we were building up to Brexit, and a no deal or something very close to a no deal was emerging, I was discussing the shortages that we risked because of our reliance on EU imports that would be threatened if we simply left the single market overnight. Amongst the list that has been rapidly ticked off this year, I discussed the chemicals needed to treat our water. Now, last week, The Independent reported that the Environment Agency is giving permission for water companies to discharge effluent without meeting the condition of their permits, as they put it. In other words, we can't get all the chemicals needed to properly treat the sewage, so do your best and then chuck it into the rivers before the job is done. The cause of this? Same root cause as almost every other shortage. Can't get the lorry drivers to ensure a reliable supply of, in this case, ferric sulfate, which is a chemical used to precipitate out heavy metals from water as well as adjust pH. Now, the article did contain a response from DEFRA, which is our government environment agency, or department rather, that includes the Environment Agency, which said that the change was strictly time limited and there are robust conditions in place to mitigate risks to the environment. So let's take those statements one at a time. They say it's strictly time limited. Well, not according to the report, they're not. The government have put this policy in place to last up until at least the end of the year, with a possible extension after that. That is not strictly time limited. Strictly time limited means it lasts up until this time and then that's it, because that's what strict means. That's your lot. It's definitely not going any further than that. So, for example, the transition period last year was strictly time limited because, against all reason, we didn't extend it. There is never a suggestion of a likely or even possible extension if it's strictly time limited, by definition. And actually, now that we're onto that, let's consider why the government are saying that this will last until at least the end of this year, and we're already thinking about it lasting into next year. See, I thought our trade problems with the EU were just temporary teething problems. That's what the government said. In January, they said that the problems were just teething problems. So it was sorted out after a few weeks, no problem. Then when we saw the data calling out this is a lie, they went, yeah, okay, it did last a bit longer, but it's all sorted out now. You know, it wasn't. But every time the data came out, 2 months later with trade data, to call out the government lies, they'd just say, yeah, it took a bit longer than expected, but it's all sorted now. Every time they were asked, it's always sorted now. Naturally, they can't really get away with saying that as easily now. You know, we can see that we're struggling to get goods into the country as well as distributed around the country. It would take a very special low level of intelligence to imagine that somehow our outbound trade, which is the one after all that is subject to all the checks, is somehow fine. But putting this change in place until at least the end of the year is the government saying that the problems with trade are definitely going to last for the full year of Brexit, and probably later. Now, we know that these trade problems are actually going to be in place for as long as this hard Brexit is, so permanently if the Conservatives are allowed to continue to get their way. But this is the government saying that our supply chain is buggered for the rest of this year. And as I say, the suggestion that an extension will be even possibly forthcoming is also an expectation that there's at least the possibility that the problems will continue into next year as well. It also highlights just how seriously our supply chain has been disrupted. You know, chemicals for treating water, fairly high priority. Anything that's needed for our quality of life should be a top priority. This policy makes our rivers much less safe for us. You know, it's an environmental disaster in general, but it poses very real heightened health risks to us. So it seems reasonable that these chemicals should have been high on the priority list for distribution. And if we can't get enough to properly treat our wastewater, I mean, we're not talking about some luxury item that's the first to fall by the wayside when transport was squeezed a bit, you know, like freshly cut flour, something like that, which has also been hit by distribution. We're talking about something that we need. But those are my thoughts on the strictly time-limited crap the government was spewing. But then there's that statement about having robust conditions in place to mitigate risks to the environment. Now, I had two thoughts about this statement. The first thought was bollocks to you. Then my second thought was to actually check what they were first. The reports didn't seem to indicate too much in terms of any follow-up confirmation. I did check out DEFRA's own statement as well. Unless you count the statement that it's only going to be for low and medium risk effluents. In other words, what they're saying is, with what little resources we now have, thanks to Brexit shortages, we're going to prioritise high risk effluents. So is that the robust mitigation? I mean, sure, it's better to do that than just to randomly chuck the not enough ferric sulfate to places by, throwing darts at a map. But that's hardly robust mitigation. Simply saying, we're going to make sure that the most serious health hazards are reduced. That's not robust mitigation. It's some mitigation, I'll grant you that. It is mitigation, it's not robust. Robust mitigation would be doing everything possible to deal with the mess. And we're not doing. The government have a choice to make. This is a political choice. They could change their immigration rules for lorry drivers. They could make that strictly time limited while they work on a plan to get more domestic lorry drivers in place. They could just keep it in place as long as is necessary to train up enough people in this country. They had a choice with Brexit. They didn't have to undermine our supply chain like this. They could have introduced elements in stages and when we were ready for them. They chose not to. They continue to choose not to. That means that this environmental and health disaster is their political choice because they could do something about it. It hasn't come as a result of an accident or anything that was unforeseen, like the pandemic. It came as a direct result of their political choices and was entirely predictable and predicted. Now, I will just say here, because some of the reports have missed a few things out. So according to the statement at source from DEFRA, this hasn't actually happened yet. You may imagine that this is going on now. It hasn't happened yet. In order to be allowed to do this, companies have to get written permission to discharge outside the conditions of their permits, as it's described. DEFRA said, as of 6 days ago, when you're watching this, that no company had yet been given this permission. So it hasn't happened yet. It's going to, but I thought it worth pointing that out to avoid misunderstandings. It's a little bit like this map. So I saw this doing the rounds on social media, and I have to say I fell for it myself. Until I thought about it, I thought, well, that's a little odd. Purports to show pollution hotspots caused by not fully treated effluent discharge. Two things about the map that are wrong, though. First thing you notice is there's none in Scotland. Now, this was being passed around as if to say Scotland doesn't have this problem because good old Scottish government devolution, all the rest of it. No. It's just that this data is for England and Wales. I did think that afterwards, the following day, I did think to myself, is that only because it contains data for England and Wales? And the thing is, if you were to read that site, and I'll put a link in the description below, you wouldn't get that impression, but that is what's happening. Because when you actually do dig a little deeper, you find that Scotland also has the same serious problem, but the data is elsewhere. Also, this map is not showing, as it purports to, untreated effluents or not fully treated effluents, because they've combined treated and untreated into the same map to make the problem seem worse than it is. And don't get me wrong, flooding, because that's what this is caused by, flooding leading to the discharge of untreated water into rivers, is a serious problem. But the graphic is deliberately misleading in order to exaggerate the problem in more than one way. But the bottom line is that because of our extreme Tory Brexit, we are having worsening shortages on our supermarket shelves. They are going to continue to get worse and won't get better anytime soon, as I discussed yesterday. We have a critical shortage of blood test tubes to the point where doctors are now not allowed to order routine blood tests anymore. We now have shortages of chemicals needed to treat sewage for heavy metals and pH balance. And that is going to mean some sewage pumped into rivers will not have been fully treated at some point. And this does start to mean that a lot of effluents isn't being fully treated. At some point, may not be happening right now, but it's now in place, the system for doing this. Imagine what's going to happen when we get flooding again. Maybe early next year, like a couple of years ago. Our water quality is going to fall through the floor. Of course, the worst Brexit shortage of all is in brain cells in our government. There's only one way to deal with that. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.